All right, welcome back to the Collective Intelligence Block Party and the Food Healers segment. And we're going to kick it off with Sailesh is going to read us a story that you wrote just yesterday, Sailesh.
Yeah, I wrote it yesterday. I mean, it's been brewing in my head for a while, but I wrote it yesterday. So maybe the best thing to do is for me to just read that so I don't miss anything. It's not a story that I can tell right away, like I do with some of the other stories. All right. It is the story of a single mother. We grow when we allow changes to change us. That's Neetal Parekh who said that. A single mother is taking care of 8 children, 4 boys and 4 girls. Each day she makes enough food for the children, leaves it in the fridge, and entrusts her eldest son to take care of his siblings while she goes to work. Every night when she returns from work, the food is gone, but her youngest daughter is still hungry, and therefore she makes more food the next day. This goes on for a while until the mother is now making 46 plates of food every day to feed her 8 children. Each day, the eldest brother takes 40 plates of food and makes one sister feed them to farmed animals. He then instructs another sister to extract food from these farmed animals, and she returns with just 1 plate of meat, dairy, fish, and eggs. Then the eldest brother announces to his siblings that there are only 7 plates of food, while there are 8 mouths to feed, and therefore they all need to work for him so that he can determine who gets to eat and who doesn't. He makes one brother build fast cars and another create shiny objects for his entertainment. He makes the third brother mine the fossil fuels and the raw materials needed for building fast cars and creating shiny objects. He makes one sister sew fancy clothes for him to wear. Finally, he tells his youngest sister that he has nothing for her to do, and since she is now jobless, she won't be eating much food either. He gets away with this for a while using divide and conquer techniques, pitting sibling against sibling based on the color of their skin or their religious and gender identities. However, despite all serving his every whim, the eldest brother himself isn't very happy either. He had been lying to his siblings that they must strive to eat animal foods because such foods are the only source of protein and calcium, important nutrients for their well-being. He had also been arguing that if the family stopped eating animal foods, the 2 sisters who work on feeding and milking the animals would become jobless and starve just like their younger sister. Such lies and specious arguments were now catching up to him. The sister who sews his clothes recently turned vegan, and she realizes that the family could not only live, but actually thrive on a whole foods plant-based vegan diet. In contrast, the eldest brother, who had been consuming the lion's share of animal foods, is now unwell, sick, and miserable, popping pills just to make it through each day. Therefore, everyone began seeing through the lies that had been keeping them working so hard to feed the desires of the eldest brother. They realized that the color of their skin or their gender identity doesn't make them inferior, as they had been told. Indeed, they are all created equal and entitled to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, just like the enslaved animals that had been exploited terribly in their midst. Therefore, they get together and imagine a different way of living, in which everyone's needs are met and even the eldest brother can regain his health. They reject the exploitation of animals and resolve to share the abundance of food that their mother had been making each day so that no one goes hungry. They resolve to clean up the mess that they had made during the process of building fast cars, creating shiny objects, and sewing fancy clothes. They resolve to regenerate the forest that they had destroyed for the production of animal foods. As a result of making all these changes, the family heals together and lives happily ever after.
Beautiful.
So that's the story. It's the backstory for food healers and um, in the K-Mama app. So we are thinking that this would be like the first episode of season 1 of Countdown to Vegan World. That's a new series that we are going to start, Countdown to Vegan World. So it'll be season 1, episode 1, up to episode whatever. And hopefully we'll have season 2, season 3, until we get to a vegan world by 2026. So that's the idea. So we're going to just make a story out of it. And so I think this will be like this is my proposal for the first story, the single mother story. And then the story is going to be about how the siblings figure out how they're going to do everything. This new way. So that's the backdrop. What else has happened this week? We have the app team working pretty hard. So they're still not ready yet with something that can be deployed. But I can give you guys an executable so that you can download it. If you have an Android phone, you can try it out. Okay. So it's a link to a Google Doc that has the executable. And we are doing things with spreadsheets. That's the first way to do it, right? While the app is being developed, you can just do everything with spreadsheets. So Myra has a list of 16 families that need to be fed. So we are thinking of basically starting with the burritos. So making burritos for the 16 families. So there are 64 people in the 16 families. So this will be like a test case, right? To see how things work. So each of us, depending on how many people are volunteering, we are going to cook rice, beans, and some vegetables, and bring tortillas. Okay, and so depending on the size of the tortillas, I think if it is 16 inches, I think we can just do 1 tortilla per meal. And so it's just mixing the 3 up, right? Assembling the tortillas and then wrapping it in a paper towel. So the tortillas done and then wrapped in paper towel. So that's where when we hand out to the families, there is nothing to take back and there is no packaging. Basically they're getting their napkin with the food. So that's what we are thinking of starting with. And now we are looking for a venue where we can assemble the tortillas. So one thought that came to us was 24 carats. And I don't know, what are your thoughts, Sasha?
So I do have some questions because, as you know, 24 carats is a regulated space. Right. So we have a lot of government entities that are fair. They help us keep our community safe, especially in light of transmittable diseases like coronavirus and things that have always been highly transmittable like norovirus. It's really important that we make sure that whatever 24 carats is able to offer both protects you guys from the vast number of interactions we have with the public, and protects our public from all of the people that we have interactions with.
Right.
So here, let me turn off this for 1 second. Oh, my husband has our house automated. Just his hobby, but it's not very helpful all the time. So one question is about how much time do you need, or rather, not necessarily a question to answer right now, but things that are important is the time that is needed, the safety measures and the procedures and operational procedures around that, Even when we donate to a shelter, we go through very strict procedural because the challenge in Arizona is that when you donate something, you are absolved of the liability that it takes after you've made that donation. It's a Good Samaritan law, which means that you've done something in good faith. And so whether or not the person on the other end gets sick is no longer a concern to you, no longer a legal concern to you. But of course, being compassionate human beings as we are, food should nourish and food should never hurt. So it's really important to me that things are kept refrigerated, stuff like that. So those are also questions that I would need to understand, because we don't have a lot of refrigeration space. We don't have a lot of, there are some nuances here of resources that we would have to understand what would be the requirement, the up and down. But I would love to learn more, if you don't mind me asking a few questions. What would be I know you were saying that you wrap the burritos in paper towels. What would be the method of distribution? Do you deliver it to the person's home? Are they meeting you somewhere? How would that go?
Yeah, right now we are thinking of delivering it to people. So we have all their addresses. So we'll figure out the best route and then go drop off one package, one brown paper bag with however many burritos they need for 2 meals. So it'll be, family of 4 will get 8 burritos, and family of 5 will get 10 burritos, and so on. So we're just going to put it in brown paper bags and go drop it off.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I think that could work pretty well. So it's intended to be 1 meal per person, or there need to be longevity? Like, are you dropping off enough burritos for the week or enough burritos for the day?
It'll be enough burritos for the day. We'll have to assemble every day. Okay, so sometime we have to set aside and assemble every day. So we used to do that at the Quaker house, for the homeless, but that was like once a week we used to do that. And so I have a bit of experience, watching the process.
Yeah.
And it takes about, depending on the number of people who come and volunteer, it could take about an hour to do the assembly.
I see. Okay. And that would be for how many burritos?
I was calculating for 128 burritos. So
that was roughly at the Quaker house. About how many would you guys do?
Yeah, that was about the same too. We were doing about 150, depending on how many people brought tortillas, how many people brought. So we were all bringing our own thing, and it was a mishmash. So every time we did it, it was a different taste for people.
Yeah, it often is with homemade food, or even restaurant-made food. It depends on who's making it and their tastes. So are you guys in need of space every day?
That's the current idea, but we could do it like once every few days in the beginning until we sort it out.
Yeah, because I will be honest, that would be challenging for any restaurant to commit, even if it's 7 hours a week. That is definitely challenging, because the restaurant itself, for instance, I get in and start cooking at 4:30 in the morning on Sundays, and it would be difficult if I did that and managed, you know what I mean?
Right.
Coordination for anything else. So those are definitely that would definitely be challenging, I would say, for you guys, to make sure that you had a consistent space if you weren't able to come in early in the morning or do it late at night for the next day, if that makes sense. So this midday time, it's crucial that the restaurant operate if they're even going to hit. Like for us, if we don't operate the full day, we won't be able to function for the next day, if that makes sense. So
got it. Yeah, I got it. Is the restaurant now fully operational right now?
No. We haven't opened our dining room yet. We have a lot of people in our families and in our community that are immune compromised, and You know, trends are not giving me much confidence right now that we're seeing cases reduce. So it's, we're just trying to be careful. And like I said, you know, we recently had an executive order that went out that said all businesses are absolved of any coronavirus. But what does that really mean, right? That means that businesses and community spaces have been given a blanket slate to do whatever they need to do to financially survive. But many businesses, including 24 Carats, holds the principle that our community should survive and our community should be nourished. So I don't feel like, you know, I don't feel like there's an easy answer to do both right now. And we have always chosen people over profits. So that's the perspective that we're going with. So
thank you for doing that, Sasha. I mean,
I believe we will survive this. It's taking a lot of faith. So
yeah. No, I mean, my heart goes out to you. I think thank you so much for doing that. Because
thank you guys for the support. Honestly, it's been challenging, but it would be a lot harder to do if we were alone, and we are certainly not. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, because my Kimaya's mom has been called back to work because they're open now, right?
Yeah.
The casino is open, so they called her back to work, and she's being tested every day. They all wear masks throughout their work all the time.
Yeah.
And but the customers don't. And apparently 15 people have gone positive now with COVID-19.
I mean, if people, I think maybe if a lot of people had the same, the food industry has always been put under a lot of notice, if that makes sense, because some of I mean, if I hear somebody cough, I'm like, what's going on? If I ever heard somebody go on our staff, I'm immediately like, what is that? And that has always been the case. And, you know, for instance, if we have an employee who is not feeling well, we not only accommodate how many ever days they need +1. So we always give them an extra day. But we also accommodate paid sick leave when they need it. And so a lot of restaurants, a lot of businesses are not able to do that. And, you know, it's turned into a conversation between public wanting a service and businesses withholding that service, rather than public wanting safety, businesses wanting safety, and the government providing that for both. And that's where I think our eyes should always be. But unfortunately, it has turned into, for instance, restaurants being both the vanguards of safety and the executors of an experience. And that is very challenging in general to be in. But we have taken this time of anxiety and difficulty and focused our energy on doing for our community, providing for those who are most vulnerable, and inviting our neighborhoods and our neighborhood leaders to join us in this effort. So thank you guys for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, this is a community effort. You know, this is about rebuilding our crumbling infrastructure, a crumbling system on a foundation of healthy, nutritious, whole plant foods that boost people's immunity so that they get healthy. Unless we are healthy, we are not going to be thinking about other things.
Right.
Yeah. Who cares about climate change if you're sick, right? I mean, if I'm sick, I'm not going to be thinking about climate change. I'm thinking about how to heal myself first. So unless we get our community healthy, nothing works. You know, so that's where the focus should be, and that's why Food Healers is about. That's what it's about.
If I could ask a few more questions, the families, the 16, you said 16 families you've identified, do they have their own shelters, or are they in a community space?
No, they have their own shelters. They've lost jobs. They don't know what to do. You know, they are in that situation because US, we have lost about 40 million jobs so far. And a lot of people are going to food banks, and they go to food banks, they get boxes, but they don't know what to do with the boxes or what's in the boxes, because it's whatever they are able to put together in a box. It's not, you can't just go and order what you want.
Right. Okay, that's helpful as well. So they have access to refrigeration and things like that to be able to preserve the longevity of the food. Okay.
Right. Yeah, so temporarily they have been given stay on, mortgage and things like that. So they don't have to, so they're mostly worried about their food.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they're mostly, people with children, so they don't know how to even getting to a food bank is a chore for them.
It's very difficult. We have not been supporting food banks directly, but we've been helping support the organizations who rely on food banks. And one of the biggest challenges is there's a drought of volunteers to be able to even run all of this food to these smaller shelters and things like that. So absolutely, it's difficult to just drive up to a food bank and say, hey, I need some, I need. So it's
right.
Absolutely.
So that's who we are serving now. There are plenty of people to serve, so it's like, clearly there is a huge need.
Oh, the need never diminishes. And that's the case. I've found, we've been doing 24 Carats now for 12 years. And in that 12 years, we have, one of our core principles has always been to give. And we've done it quietly for a very long time. And now we're public about it because we want to show people and remind them that there are individuals out there with so much less, even when we have less than we used to have, and honestly, the need has never diminished, ever. So that's definitely a challenge.
Yeah, so the idea behind the app is to connect people who need food with places of worship that can actually, that have kitchens that can supply the food, that have volunteers available. So then we're going to be recruiting places of worship. So that's what I tried to do. First, to try to get SVK Temple to do it. But
were they able to, or are they open yet to be able to?
They're not open yet. And so that's the first problem. And so then they have to go to the executive board to get permission to open. So there are issues.
It's definitely very challenging. So all of the individuals that you guys are supporting right now would have access to a smartphone that could, work with them on this app. Is that correct?
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
So the idea is the app is just going to automate what we are trying out on the ground first.
Okay.
So it'll automate it and then make it available to every city, every place of worship. So you just then assign an admin for every city, and then they go and do the recruiting of places of worship. So on Monday, I'll be talking to the Interfaith Vegan Coalition, thanks to Jackie again, and see if we can get them involved in doing the recruiting of places of worship. But there's time enough. There's time for that. First we have to just get the app sorted out and then implement it here, in these test cases, and see how they work out.
Got it.
Okay. And initially, I just started cooking at home and taking it to just one family. So see if I can serve one family, and it worked out. Basically, they were thrilled at the variety I was coming up with, with my own little kitchen.
Yeah.
Yeah. And she even said, I didn't realize that eating just plants could be this tasty and this.
Yeah. How did you connect with this family?
Through Myra. Myra has, we have a spreadsheet, so I can put you on that spreadsheet.
Sure.
I'll invite you to join that spreadsheet. So we have spreadsheets where she's been adding families as they contact her saying they need food. She's been adding them. So she's been adding the addresses, the phone numbers, the number of people in the family, so that we know, when we start serving them, that we know how many burritos have to go there, right?
Right.
I have a question, Sailesh. Are you talking about the document that you created that we've been adding to?
Yes.
Okay, so so that second sheet that I created was for the vegan food boxes.
Right.
And I'm creating like another list because we got calls. 4 people could not receive boxes, and we just got 3 more calls yesterday. So are we thinking of using that same list that we just delivered the food boxes to also include them for the fresh food deliveries as well, that same list?
Okay. I mean, you can create a new sheet if you need. Okay, so you are an editor on that.
Okay.
If you need to separate them, just create a new sheet and then start adding addresses in the new sheet of people who want fresh food.
Do we want to use the same list that because Wednesday we just delivered the food boxes, so we want to use that same list that's already there and just continue on that one?
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I mean, as you can see, the community is trying, to figure out how to deal with this from the ground up. But I am convinced that on a global scale, we need to rebuild our new system on a foundation of healthy.
There's a lot of deficiencies in our current understanding of the food system, I would say. And I think that current scenarios are showing people what that is. But what's that saying? First you ignore me, then you laugh, then you fight, then you win. And I feel like a lot of people have food is such an emotional issue for so many people, and it's so psychologically supportive that when the world is particularly challenging to deal with, they have a very hard time letting go of certain nuances of diet that may, for so many different reasons, be unaffordable. And that, I think, is one of the challenges we're facing right now, is that we're asking people to expand their minds when everything else is contracting in their life, and that's very difficult.
No, I completely agree with you.
Vegan cupcakes go a long way to do that. So
yeah, vegan food does that. Yeah.
Yeah, something delicious goes a long way to do that. Yeah. So in what ways can I be supportive? Because it would be definitely, I'll be honest, it will be challenging for us to be able to just hand over our kitchen every day without also making sure that somebody is there. Because we can't have, under our liability guidelines, we can't have somebody who is not employed by the restaurant and under our umbrella of workman's comp, be on the premises or open the doors without, you know what I mean? There's a defined difference between customer and employee when it comes to business liability. So how can I best help? And just give me all of the guidelines of what you would need so that I can try to figure out what that would be on 24 Carats end.
Okay, no, we were not expecting kitchen space at all.
Oh, I'm actually not even allowed to have somebody on our patio if we're not open. So it's a very interesting thing. But those guidelines are far looser than, than having somebody in the kitchen.
So it's just just like we did the peanut butter and jelly assembly, just putting a few of your tables together, it'll be very similar to that.
Okay.
So we would just bring our own cooked food and then we would be assembling it.
I see. Okay.
Right. So I think what you did for us for the peanut butter and jelly assembly for the homeless, that's exactly what we were expecting.
Okay. I think we can definitely do that. One of the, I think, benefits at that point was that our dining room was open. It's closed right now, which can work in our favor since people won't be sitting in there for the time being. We still maintain social distancing within the restaurant, so we would have to make sure that the number of volunteers were severely limited so that we didn't have 15 or 20 people sitting in our dining room. We have people on our staff that could not afford any chance of illness right now. So I apologize for, kind of putting that in over and over again, but I have to advocate for them as well. So.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we'll all be wearing masks and, we'll be wearing gloves. So this is.
How many volunteers would you have at most?
Right now, I don't know, maybe 4 at most,
Okay.
4 or 5.
Four would be perfect.
Okay.
It takes our team roughly, it takes us roughly, hi Mitchie. Sorry guys, this is.
Mitchie! Mitchie!
Mitchie has a mind of her own. She doesn't like it when people are on the phone. And she wonders why people aren't talking to her. Usually. Kaju. Okay. But yeah, I think 4 people work really well because we usually have at least 4 or 5 people on staff. And that'll give us some headway for being able to have customers still come in and be able to pick up their meals. Because if we have, say, 6 to 10 people in the dining room plus, 4 or 5 people on staff, and then 4 people walk in, we're already at 20, which is more than what I feel comfortable with right now. That'll, of course, expand and change. We eventually have to get back to our 100-person capacity. So it's just, it's a lot. And if we do it, depending on the time of the day that we do it, we can even open up the garage door and increase circulation and things like that as well.
Yes, Jamin.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Sasha, so great to be talking with you and see what, and just, I really congratulate you because you're here with us working it out together in a public forum, and that really takes something rather than saying, well, give me a complete proposal and then I'll go look at it. No, you're working it out with us. And in that spirit, I just wanted to screen share here just really quickly. This is just a data point, and then I've got a couple comments about like how we might do this. But anyway, this is the first community cafe just that we created in 2015 as a temporary thing to feed the entire community of Rosamond, California. And so we just created this right in front of a business that let us do it as, essentially a pop-up, but, with city government support and everything. And so restaurants then brought the food to us, in this case, hot and ready to go. And we just fed the whole town for free. We, in our case, we paid the restaurants for the food under the understanding that, hey, look, we're just doing this out of our own pockets for the benefit of everyone. So, please sell us the food at cost was what we, our request. And they basically played with us under those terms, and it was quite successful. Now what I wanted to talk about, I actually have a background in logistics and have thought about this a fair amount. So the one big question for me is, what makes the most sense? Does it make the most sense to prepare the food hot, deliver it hot, and it gets eaten hot, versus cold? And obviously the food lasts way longer if it's cold, right? And the colder the better. I mean, a frozen burrito can last for, weeks or whatever.
Yeah.
So I think what really makes the most sense to me is cold. And imagine that we had different sort of community cafe stations throughout the city, participating restaurants could deliver cold. There's a cooler there. It doesn't even have to be refrigerated. It can just be, there can be ice delivered. You know, here's a bag of ice, and there's a lot of restaurants have ice machines, and you know, here you go. And for people to then pick up directly from these points. Part of our mission, and this is something that's evolving, is that we make this very public and turn it into a global movement, because we have such tight time constraints within which to accomplish our goals. And our goals are actually quite broad and holistic. And in fact, feeding everyone is sort of a first major milestone toward achieving a planetary transformation, a radical planetary transformation, where humanity is sufficiently cared for and united and working together that we can then take on much bigger challenges like cooling the planet in time, which is a gargantuan challenge that was our initial focus prior to COVID. Now we're very happily making a detour into the world of food. I'm just speaking for myself. You know, everyone has their own journey here. So I just wanted to put those points on the table as we're co-creating this, because with the biggest concentration of our network is in Arizona, headed precisely by Sailesh, Jackie, Myra, and many others, and now you're happily yourself, Sasha, and thank you so much for being here. So just kind of thinking out loud, I wanted to put it on the table that as we work out the logistics to all this, let's also think about the PR and the public facing part of this. Do we create different pop-up stands throughout the city with a really compelling, you know, brand and identity? Like, for example, I love the story Stone Soup. So I have this, you know, so I came up with the concept of Operation Stone Soup. Let's operationalize that story throughout the world. Anyway, so that's a name I love. Sailesh came up with Food Healers. We've been kicking around different names, but let's not get hung up on the name, but more the concept. What is the big picture concept? Do we want to have a really public presence? I say, why not? Because as we do that, people are going to get inspired. I really feel like we're at a tipping point here, where, as you were saying, Sasha, you were doing things, you know, quietly, you know, and now you're doing it more publicly. And I thank you for both of those efforts. And I really think this is the time for us to go public and really make our mark and become a story. And that's something I have expertise in as well. It's a feel-good story, right? And I think as the story gets out there, more and more people will want to come out and volunteer because they're bored at home sitting, you know, yelling at the television. Let's get out there and change the world together. Anyway, I just wanted to put those things on the table for the conversation. Going on mute, thank you. Oh, you're on mute, Sasha. I'm gonna go ahead. Yeah.
You had mentioned a few things, some of which were questions about the process of cold food versus hot food, and delivery methods, whether they should come to you or you should go to them. And I think there's a few things at play here. So I'll first address what would be the most efficient way to offer a large number of people a meal. And then perhaps we can talk about the nuances of coming versus going, that kind of thing. So for, it is always easier to deliver cold food. It is always easier to deliver something and safer to deliver something for which no refrigeration is needed, because you will absolutely, we're at 115 degrees outside right now. The temperature at which bacteria will start to grow is after 45 degrees and up to, 90. And everything we make, whether it's a burrito that has a hot filling and is now sitting in a container with several other burritos. So for instance, if 24 Carats was making these burritos, the way we would do it is we would make the fillings, we would fast cool the fillings. So the filling would be cooked. The filling would be cooled within 30 minutes in an ice bath. It would be brought down to temperature, and then just before we're about to send it out, we would bring it back up to at least 145 degrees, wrap the fillings within like rapid fire. So if we had 164 burritos to do, we would assign out to each person on our team 20 burritos, and it takes them roughly 25 minutes to roll 20 burritos. And so we would then time that so that within 25 minutes we have all 100 and some odd burritos done, and then drive them out so that we're delivering this food within a specific time frame that I know that's not, if like Sailesh, I've catered for Jackie and Sailesh at other organizations, and my first question to them is, what time will people be eating this? You know, like, when will it be actually going into someone's belly? I delivered burritos to a shelter in downtown Phoenix, and I knew that some of the people who would be receiving these burritos are individuals facing homelessness who are living in tents. And because the burritos had potato in it, I had to tell them, you cannot take this outside unless the person's going to eat it right away. Because if they keep that potato burrito with them, it will spoil like that, and it'll create more problems for a person. So that's to answer one question. Full food is always easier. It is 99% usually safer, depending on what the filling is or what the actual, you know, what it is. If it's like a salad burrito, it's not nearly as concerning. If, say, you have cut melon is very susceptible to certain bad agents, I guess you could say. It spoils differently. So understanding those kinds of things help make it a little easier. Another question is, when, in regard to delivery methods, right? One of the challenges is, what is most convenient for the person who is receiving the food, especially in a scenario like this, right? Do they have the money for gas to be driving out to a restaurant? Do they have small children who may not like a burrito? Would it be easier to deliver, to get a series of Pyrex bowls, right? Or Snapware, some sort of glass container that could be reusable, and give them the burrito filling and then give them a stack of tortillas? You know, is that something that would be, does that put the element of control of when they eat, how they eat, they can heat it up right before they, you know, and that's why I asked the people who are necessarily, like, do they have access to a kitchen where they can control the cooling and heating of the food that they're receiving? And I think one of the challenges is that, you know, I have been working with my own team in the same regard, where we have a want to support, and we are usually able to realize, we have the conversation within ourselves about, this is the need I see in the world. How can I best support that need with the skill set that I have? But one of the challenges of that conversation is that you have to include the person who's receiving it. And I tell my team this all the time, sometimes the way we want to give is not the easiest way for somebody to receive. And that's where a lot of the internal questions come from. So for instance, I have one of the organizations that 24 Carats supports is a domestic violence shelter. And I absolutely thought that they would be down for us to prepare cooked food and go and drop it off. And I could do that like that. They didn't want that. They wanted me to teach them how to cook. This is an infinitely larger challenge to change the nutrition profile of a shelter. And that requires almost 40 hours worth of work per month from me, at least. So it's literally an extra work week that I have to factor in. But at that point, I had the choice of either offering them help in the parameters that were comfortable for me, or listening to how they actually needed it. So for instance, if someone is unable to figure out what to do with the ingredients of what they're receiving, right? Say from a food bank or anything else. And I completely understand that, because most of the shelters that I work with are dependent on food banks, and they often aren't really sure what they're going to receive. But the question is, what happens when you stop? Something has to be incredibly sustainable and you understand this as from the perspective of logistics, is that if they are always dependent on you for the meal, at some point you have to transition them into being, independent on their own. And that can happen in very small ways, like, here's a filling, this is how you wrap a burrito, do it, right? Or if you have a kid who doesn't want that burrito, or wants to be able to see it. I've seen all of these things. One of the shelters that we have been able to go to, the domestic violence shelter, we had a couple of people say no, they didn't want the food. And here I am, I've spent 8 hours making this meal, and I'm there physically. I crowdsourced all of the ingredients. I brought it to them. I cooked it there. I taught their team how to make it. And then my first or second customer who walked up was like, no, because food is comforting, and they didn't recognize what it was that I was bringing them, right? So the director there kept apologizing to me, and I was telling her, you don't need to apologize for several reasons. One is that this is a longevity game. Any challenge to give requires endurance, and that endurance also requires that we hear what it is that person wants. So next time, rather than doing, roasted carrots with balsamic and pistachio, I'm going to do lasagna because it is recognizable, and easier for someone to eat. So I hope that that's kind of helps, like deciding whether somebody should come to you versus you go to them. Also depends on what that person has access to. So many people on my team alone are single car families. So if one person gets their job back and has the opportunity to, bring home income, they may not have a car to be able to come and get food. So having like maybe a balance between the two, a few locations where you can see the concentration of families that you would be going to, and say, okay, there are like 25 families over here. There's only 3 families out here. Let's deliver to these 3 families, and let's create a central commissary for these 25 families. I would say that those are the kinds of flexibility that a program like this would need to make sure that they can service each community without the same large brush, if that makes sense. It has to be dynamic across it. I hope that helps. So.
Definitely. I'd love to hear from Sailesh. Sailesh, I mean, you've obviously thought about this a ton, and you're super smart with engineering and whatnot as well. So, I mean, are you leaning more towards cold or more towards hot at this point?
I actually, cold would be ideal, obviously, because then it's something that they can heat up if they need to, because they all have kitchens. At least the families that we are serving right now, right? So, yeah, we are thinking of just bringing cooked food, making it up, and then, the idea behind the burritos is just it's a packaging, and it's making sure you don't go around spreading more plastic waste when you're doing your deliveries. So we were thinking of, I mean, at least with the family that I was serving before, I was giving them one container with the food, and then picking up the container the next day, so giving them a new container. So just switching the two. So it's just 2 containers I was switching back and forth. Okay. That would work too, but that means that you have to get the container back from them, and then you have to go and clean that up for the next one.
Yeah, definitely. I want to applaud you though, Sailesh. That's definitely challenging to do, even if it's for one family. And what I mean to say by applaud you is that often people don't understand that basic endurance of what it takes to be dependable to somebody else. And that's one of the things that I have recognized is, you know, we've been serving breakfast on Sunday mornings to a shelter in downtown Phoenix that supports 47 elderly, medically vulnerable elderly individuals facing homelessness, and they are helping them self-isolate together to spread, you know, stop and hopefully make sure that all of them are safe from coronavirus. And I have been delivering this every Sunday for the last 4 Sundays. And this last time when I walked in, the one of the caretakers, one of the workers there, she turned to another one and said, "Melanie, they're here. It's going to be okay." And I think that one of the biggest challenges is that once you recognize, so we have run out of money to be able to do that. We have been crowdsourcing donations in partnership with a nonprofit organization that can absorb these donations for us. And then we essentially give the nonprofit a proposal. This shelter needs this many meals for this much. And this is the cost of the materials and things like that, so that we don't ask farmers to donate. And when we give them really high quality meals, like organic ingredients, and, you know, we have some people there who have high blood pressure, so we make low salt meals and things like that for them. So for us to have the longevity of this, I have to budget at least $10 per person per meal to make sure that we're not asking anybody in the pipeline who has significantly less. So for instance, farmers whose farm hands are probably making anywhere between $7 and $10 an hour, to ask them to donate their product. Or even my team who will pay sometimes, you know, $15 on an Uber ride to come to work, to then work 2 hours for free. It's unfair to do that. So what we did was we had applied for the PPP loan to be able to have enough funds to make sure to guarantee income for our teammates for 2.5 months at least, hopefully, or 2 months at least. And then we said, all right, let's work with this nonprofit to fundraise the materials costs that it would take. So 24 Carats will take on the labor costs, our community will take on the materials cost, and together we will get this out. And for this particular project, I have to figure out more funding for it. But when I walked in and I heard her say that, I recognized that she now depends on me. That me saying no is no longer an option. And that is, I'm sure, Sailesh, you realized that within the first or second day that you started delivering to them. And that's what I mean to say I applaud you for that, because those are silent responsibilities that individuals, yes, jazz hands, those are silent responsibilities that we take for one another, that is publicly never able to be remunerated, no matter what the campaign is for public, you know, public relations or anything like that. But the remuneration has to be what we feel. It has to be the satisfaction of, the first time I walked into that campus, a gentleman just looked at me and said, "No more burritos," because that is what a lot of people get. And specifically, he didn't want breakfast burritos because unfortunately in this country, eggs are very cheap. And that's what a lot of places get donated. And a lot of kitchens just turn it into whatever, scrambled egg burritos or whatnot. And that's the first thing he said as I'm wheeling these chia seed pudding oatmeal parfaits in with like cashew yogurt and stuff like that. But the second time I went in, he said, "Do you have socks that would fit me?" So the third time I brought socks. And the third time, he didn't say anything to me. He didn't ask me about socks. He didn't ask me about anything. But the fourth time I went in, he said, "Hey there, little lady, what did you bring me today?" It took him 4 weeks to understand that I could be a fixture in his life. And the second he recognized that, now if I need a Sunday off, I'm going to find somebody else to do it, you know? It's no longer going to be the shelter's responsibility to feed them, at least for that one meal. It has now, at least in my mind, become my responsibility. So I think it's also important when we're talking about what the logistics of supporting somebody is, that we also recognize the logistics of supporting the responsibility threshold that your volunteers will be taking on, because they will feel very attached to what happens to that family. So there has to be a network of support within the volunteer band as well, so that if somebody can't do this, or if somebody goes on vacation, or if somebody gets ill, the banner under which we do our programs is called Carrot Cares. And it was a program that we had done 2 years ago, and it went on hiatus for 1.5 years because I needed extensive knee surgery on my right leg. So I couldn't drive. I couldn't press the brake. I couldn't press the accelerator. I was in a wheelchair for 3 months. I couldn't get in or out of the car without somebody helping me. But that was the threshold, that because I was one person doing the work and I didn't have a support group to help me do that, when that one person wasn't able to do it, that entire system collapsed. And that's one of the things that we're recognizing now. So I would say also with expansion, just make sure that there is adequate support for all of the volunteers, so that when someone like yourself, Sailesh, does so much, that you are not burdened with the worry that if you stop even for 1 minute to catch your breath, that that family would then be not supported.
Yeah, I hear you. I think they become part of your family. So when you start serving them, it becomes a very close connection. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I felt every day I felt the responsibility to make sure that I figured out what I was cooking, and whether they like it or not, because I was asking for feedback for every meal that I was giving them. But they never said anything that was negative any time. And so they also responded exactly the same way. I became part of their family. Mm-hmm. You won't believe how many times I've received messages saying, "Bless you, God bless you. God bless you and everyone associated with you." So yeah, I think that it's lasting. It's a lasting bond that happens between the one you're serving and the one who's.
And the goal is, at least for us, the goal is that eventually they no longer need your service.
Yes.
And that's where I think systems like this actually engage, is that we're not looking to, we're looking to emancipate. We're looking to emancipate people from poverty. And that happens in several ways. One of them is that you are, there's systems of equality, right? That we all get a meal, so this person should get a meal as well. And there's systems of equity. We all get a meal of this level of nutrition. This person could get a meal of this level of nutrition as well. And then we have the ability to cook and do for ourselves, so that the element of choice elevates us from this level of equity to this level, where we are now in control of what we get to eat. And that's where we want to get these guys as well, so that they're in control of all of that. Guys, my grandmother may join us. I'm sitting at her tea table, so I'm taking a party. Huh? Amma oru conference call la irukken po. Conference call la irukken po.
Vandu karanga.
Huh?
Namaskaram, Patti.
Namaskaram. Yaru என்னோட friend.
Shocking for her, huh? That I can speak Tamil.
She's not used to that.
Welcome, grandmother. I also want to welcome Jubilee, and is it Nivi? If I'm pronouncing it right, Nivi, welcome, everyone. What a wonderful conversation. I'd like to share some thoughts at this point, if I'm not interrupting anyone. And here's the thing. So I'm totally feeling what you're talking about, Sasha. Starting at the age of 16, I would go every summer and every winter vacation to a region of Mexico to do latrine construction and follow up and all this. And so for me, service has been a big part of my life. And I totally get what you're saying. When you start offering, you know, you become part of their world of a crucial missing piece, right? And just as none of us would ever want to adopt a homeless child only to turn them out back onto the street months later, it's a permanent thing. When you adopt, you adopt. So what we're talking about here, what I'd like to see this evolve into very quickly is something where there is such an infrastructure, such a community, and such a mission, a shared mission here, that it just draws people in. And so there is just more and more and more and more support until it becomes something that the community as a whole, maybe there's a wait list for volunteers, right? We got too many volunteers, too many people want to be a part of this, and we can't, you know, like you said, we can't crowd the kitchens with COVID and all that. So, and with that in mind, we've been talking and thinking about how do we do this as a big story, the feel-good story, right? In the midst of all this bad news, this can be this beacon of good news, and to do it at scale. So what I'd like to do, I'll screen share just some images to show in a parallel universe how we took another parallel situation where, in this case, in the case of cannabis, marijuana, it used to be the domain of unwashed hippies with machine guns up in Northern California, growing a bunch of ganja, making millions of dollars, killing anyone who got in their way. And in the state of Washington, we pioneered the legalization, regulation, et cetera, of cannabis. At the time, I was focused on precisely this issue: how do we end world hunger? And then I put two and two together. I said, wait a second, if we can turn the cannabis industry into an engine for generating profits that will go to end hunger, then we got a winning combination. So I jumped into the cannabis industry with exactly that commitment, that 100% of any profits that I would generate would go to ending hunger. And, but the screens I want to show here are of a story of a movement building, getting massive attention from, in this case, the world, internationally. And I think we have the potential to do that in Arizona, for starters, with heroes like the folks who are on this meeting right now, taking the lead, but then inspiring thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands to get involved. So with that, I'm just going to share some images of this evolution, again, from unwashed hippies with machine guns to a whole new paradigm. So let me screen share over here. Bear with me. Okay. Okay, the image on the right is me with a haircut. The vast majority of my life, I almost had no hair, and now I'm this hairy dude. Now I look like the proverbial unwashed hippie with a machine gun, except hold the machine gun. And on the left is my great-grandfather, Diego Pellicer, who was the largest grower of hemp in the world in the Victorian era. So I built a brand of cannabis based on his legacy and committed 100% of my share of the profits to ending hunger. And when the media heard this story, because I'm ex-Microsoft, so they started calling me the Bill Gates of Bud, and the media just came running to cover the story. What's going on here, right? And are they going to arrest this guy or what? A company in Taiwan was the one that actually branded me, this media company, NMA TV, branded me the Bill Gates of Bud, and it stuck. Fox News invited me out to New York, did a great interview, started telling the story nationally, and then internationally. Here I am on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange announcing the .bong era of legalized cannabis. But when I invited my old friend, former Mexican President Vicente Fox, whose country has been suffering under criminal drug cartels and tens of thousands of murders of children, and just terrible, terrible stuff, everything just exploded. People couldn't get enough of the story. It's a feel-good story, a fascinating story. And so we just kept going and going and going. And now, of course, if you come to the state of Washington, there's cannabis shops everywhere. highly regulated. It has become a part of the community, a part of life here. We kicked it off in a huge international way with a big press conference that President Vicente Fox and I co-organized. And then we kicked off a whole international tour. And it just became the talk of certainly Mexico and Latin America, and to a lesser degree, the United States. Here we are in Mexico with kicking off a 3-day symposium in the heart of the drug war. For example, representatives from Uruguay were there, as well as many countries from around the world. And within a few months, Uruguay became the first country in the world to legalize cannabis. So when we take this on and really commit to it and do it publicly and say, we are here to stay, we're here to grow, we're here to change the paradigm, people get inspired and they'll come pouring in. So I say, in the case of cannabis, we started here in the state of Washington. In the case of food healers, I say we start in Arizona, but we think big, we plan big, and then we execute big and do a big public press conference at the appropriate time to say, okay, we've been doing, here's our story, here's who we are. Now we're taking it to the next level, and it's an invitation, come join us. So I just wanted to make the case for all of that. And also the case for collective intelligence, which at radish.org, the collective intelligence block party, et cetera. That's what we're putting together, infrastructure and systems to bring all of us together. Welcome, Rebecca, to be able to sort out all these finer points and bring together expertise in marketing and branding with restaurant operations, right? With logistics, with nutrition, with veganism, et cetera, food safety, all of the above, to put together to roll together a complete super burrito of solutions. So anyway, just wanted to put all that on the table. So great to see everyone here, and I'll go on mute and just really encourage everyone to jump in and share. Just raise your hand, and even if a queue forms, we'll get to everyone. So going on mute. Thank you.
Yeah, one question, Jamin. Can you continue and tell us what happened to your idea of ending world hunger, and so complete the story if you can.
Yeah, absolutely. So so I got very wrapped up in the cannabis thing and making all of that happen. But when we went to Mexico and did that 3-day international symposium in the midst of the drug war, committing that we would put the drug cartels out of business, I started to receive death threats from criminal drug cartels. And they demanded that I get out of the media, or they would, and I quote, get rid of me. So because of family situations, mother, father, aunts, uncles, et cetera, I basically couldn't afford to die at that time. And so I got out of the spotlight and focused on what I really care about most, which is bringing the world together through collective intelligence to end hunger, cool the planet, et cetera. Started working on community cafes like the images I shared earlier, and also on collective intelligence. And it's just been a whole journey since then. And ending hunger has been my passion ever since I was 14 years old, living in Spain and seeing terrible poverty that I just had no concept of as a, middle-class white kid in America prior to that. So, but then over time also found that we've got many other urgencies at our doorstep, such as exponential planetary overheating and the need to address that. So just as with the cannabis industry, I came into it with the intention of ending hunger, but then saw so many other social and ecological injustices that we could address simultaneously, namely the end of prohibition and the end of organized crime in the distribution of drugs. And so I started to think holistically about the whole thing and the possibility of solving all of our most daunting problems holistically and simultaneously, right? And that was the inspiration for Radish, for radical collective intelligence, collective superintelligence, and everything we're doing here on the block party, the 24-hour block party that we do every week, every Friday, Saturday, and so on. So that's it in a nutshell. Please ask questions. Any questions you have, I'd love to answer. don't want to hog the microphone too much. So going on mute.
Well, Jamin, and the rest of you, thank you so much for having me, Sailesh. Thank you so much for inviting me here. First of all, I apologize that I joined an hour later than you guys started. I did have a meeting earlier, but I'm so glad that I got to hear your name's not Shrikar. I'm sorry.
My name is Sadhana or Sasha. Either is fine.
Okay,
But
okay.
Shrikar is my husband, and he's the technologically sound one of the two of us. So.
Which is why I asked. I didn't want to address you with that name. So Sadhana or Sasha, that was beautiful that you were sharing. And Jamin, your amazing, amazing, amazing story. I've taken note of it. And am I pronouncing your name right? Jacques, or is it the French pronunciation?
It's Jackie.
Oh, it's Jackie. I'm so sorry. All right. So Jackie and we've exchanged a few, we've traded a few messages, and through her is how I first got to know about radish.org and your own company, which is Seeds to Inspire, right? Yeah. So I've been looking at the YouTube channel, and I've been, so that I can be very intelligent when I get to speak with Jackie, which is going to be next week. All right. So, Jamin, wonderful story, and the amazing work that is happening with collective intelligence and food healers is just is stunning. And I'm a branding and a marketing person from my background. Worked about 15 years with different companies like Unilever and Boston Scientific, and all of peddling a different type of drug, which is the main type of drug that is mesmerizing us in our microbiome. So now that I'm over onto the Jedi side with you guys, and no longer with Darth Vader, right? And Sailesh invited me to be here and be a base camper and all of that. I'm incredibly excited. A couple of things that I wanted to share and ask at the same time. So one, Jamin, what I love about the approach that you have is the intention. And the intention at going at a systemic injustice holistically, right? And you shared that with how you used marketing and PR and leveraged media to come on your side. And eventually we know that when we poke big drug or big pharma or big food, or big beverage, they come back at people using death threats and dire tactics, right? Because they know that the end is near. And now you're starting to create the same system and with holding the intention of hunger alleviation around the world. My question to you is that as you start to develop the marketing PR machinery or unleashing that media opportunity with this intention, and then start to build that mission, so typically what happens is that media wants to go against the Goliath, right? And in that case is basically the drug cartels and all these other governments that might be corrupted, and there's inroads that these drug cartels have made, and the media want that story because of that. With hunger alleviation and end to global hunger, who do you think is going to be that Goliath that the media, marketing, PR machinery should be going up against?
That's a really, really great question. And
yes, Jamin is gone. He will no longer be with us. This is Darth taking over.
Actually, I have a full professional Darth Vader costume, actually 2 of them. And after my father passed away, because I didn't want to die when my dad was dying, right? But after he passed, I had to ask myself, what would my dad do? And he took on the mafia decades earlier in California as they were rolling out casinos. He said, hell no. They sent a hitman, and he started to build a movement to stop the spread of casinos in Northern California. They sent a hitman to kill my father. And my dad beat the crap out of the hitman and sent him back to the mob as damaged goods, sending them a clear message. And then they couldn't mess with him again because it would be too obvious. And so I then started a movement to rid the state of Washington of all criminal drug cartels with my Darth Vader costume, singing Spanish love songs, and did it in such a public way that if they were to kill me, again, it would really blow up in their faces, because I've got so much dirt against them. They've been rather sloppy. And so at that time, rather than kill me, they went after my community cafe operation and sent literally a boutique criminal organization, highly sophisticated, to infiltrate, disrupt, make death threats, extort, and basically shut us down. So the Goliath for me remains organized crime. They're much more vicious. And this battle isn't over, and it's a delicate balance between taking down organized crime and getting taken down yourself. And I've lost the fear of death, just given the magnitude of what we're doing. And so I'm prepared to tell that story publicly, and at the right time, call out the right people, or the wrong people, as the case may be. So for me, it's organized crime. Now, what's interesting is organized crime has spilled over into corporate America, corporate England, corporate Switzerland, corporate whatever, as we all know. So corporate Holland in the case of Unilever. And these giant criminal organizations, call a spade, they don't go down without a fight, as we know. So, but and therein I think lies the bifurcation between food healers on one hand and bloody, vicious, ghoulishly violent organized crime on the other. America, take your pick. World, take your pick. Which do you want? So I think we've got a golden opportunity at our initial press conference as we kick this off. I'll get a haircut. My hair has never been longer. I'm just letting it grow out for fun with the whole COVID and everything else, but I'll get a haircut. I'll clean myself up, drag my suits and neckties out of the closet, and we will give the world a press conference that they cannot ignore and that they'll fall in love with. So I think the key is bifurcation, Coke versus Pepsi. It works, right? And it works in hunger versus organized crime, food healers versus criminal organizations. It worked with the case of cannabis. I said to the world, what do you want? Organized crime or responsible, in our case, very inspired, compassionate businesses leading the charge? And anyway, those are some of my thoughts, but keep asking questions and let's keep the collective intelligence flowing. Love everything you're saying. Nivi, I'd heard about you from Sailesh. I'm so grateful you're here. So going on mute, and Jubilee has her hand up as well. Go for it, Jubilee.
Sorry, I was on mute and I clicked on chat instead. Kind of want to hear what Nivi was saying. Kind of don't want to speak, but I wanted to find out about the decentralized, the people who went after you with death threats. My solution in the back of my head to that is that there isn't one central body, right? There isn't one person to go after. If we're distributed around the globe, if we're distributed around the United States, even if you're just American, that there is no one figure to go after. Not having a central figure so that you can't do that. There's just no one to attack, whether it's organized crime or any of the other big conglomerates. And then I had some other amazing, Sasha's talk that I came in on was just like so amazing and got a lot of stuff sparking, but I will stick with that one because otherwise I will go in 15 different directions.
Beautiful, thank you. Go ahead, Sasha, yes. Mm-hmm.
So I think with regard to some of Nivi's questions, I think one of the challenges that the PR community, sorry guys, I have a lot of dogs, a lot of very vocal dogs. I know, I love you too. You guys can't do this right now. There you go. I think one of the challenges is not necessarily a them versus us, but it's understanding how to how to appropriately parse the parts of them that are necessary and needed, and the parts of us that could speak to those necessary entities. And let me give you some examples. So as a vegan, I have a lot of issues with the Farm Bill, a lot of challenges with how funds are distributed. A lot of animal agriculture is subsidized by bills like that. But it also provides funding for the SNAP program. And the SNAP program accommodates 90% and addresses 90% of food insecurity in this community, in this country. And so the challenge is how do you negotiate between the two of those? In the same way, I absolutely ask large corporations for donations. I absolutely, one of the reasons why, we partnered or created this nonprofit alliance is to allow corporate entities, people who work at the Intels and the Microsofts of the world, to be able to donate to a 501c3, be able to get a matching donation, and to be able to show these larger corporations where their consumer base wants to vote their dollars, right? So part of it is, I think what movements like this have going for them is they're very difficult to say no to. Who is going to tell you, let's not end world hunger? Who's going to say, let's not do these things? But what they will say is, what are the systems of injustice that support larger political motivations in this country, right? So what does increasing equity in this country, where does that start to tick the wrong people off, if that makes sense? And for instance, it's there are several layers of, how do I say this? There are several layers to every issue. And one of the challenges is, as an advocate, we can only speak for the service that we're doing. But as a PR professional, what you can do is help us speak to each of those layers. So for instance, one of my biggest issues, like 2 days ago, when we had Blackout Tuesday, I popped up my blackout screen on 24 Carats page, and then I immediately followed it, which is not the intention. The intention is that you leave the conversation for the importance of the movement. But I immediately had to follow it with a storyboard on my Instagram, petitioning the governor, asking the governor, you've put in a curfew in Arizona. You have allowed our police force to utilize tear gas and things like that. What are you doing for our populations facing homelessness in downtown Phoenix right now? Where are the gaps in your narrative of protecting the people that you are not addressing the core responsibilities that I have taken on? So like I was saying earlier to Sailesh, the individuals that I serve there, they're very small. I'm serving maybe 50 when I'm able to give meals to those 50. The meager provisions that were saved for them can then be served to at least another 50. But that's a very small drop in the bucket, but it has galvanized me to care. So I would say the first thing is to figure out what is that universal message to increase what I call extreme ownership, right? In both the people who are committed to a task and the people who are listening to that, whether they're financially committed or they just love the PR of it. The city of Phoenix loves the idea that restaurants are coming in and feeding their populations. They're not going to want to get that, give that up. So what is that equalizing factor for whatever reason that somebody wants to listen to you? The next is how do you get the systems of injustice that are not all unjust, right? The government also, the same police force that's releasing this tear gas and whatnot also helps sanitize the tents that are around Grant Street in downtown Phoenix. And those are really challenging conversations to have. But what I feel like the PR community can do is find those kernels of connectivity and expand them, right? To say, okay, Governor Ducey, I recognize that you are against whatever, but do you realize that tear gas stays in the air? That these individuals that are most vulnerable in our communities have nowhere to go. They can't go to a public place right now because they're closed. They can't go to a private place without having written permission. They don't have a shelter to walk out of. So what, if I can give you just a quick example, the city of Phoenix, I think it was Phoenix Convention Center, allowed for people to come in, homeless individuals to come in between the times of 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. to be able to just kind of get a little relief from the heat. But that means at 7 p.m., it's still, in Phoenix at least, it's still like 101 degrees. They were not able to stay the night. So they walked out and there were still remnants of tear gas in the air. So now what the goal would be to tell somebody who had the power to change, you have compassion to offer these people shelter during the day, during the hottest times, and remind them of the narrative that now that they have left that shelter that you provided, they have nowhere to go. They have no barricade to put between themselves and this toxic air they're breathing. And they don't even have water to wash their face with if they were affected, you know? So that is where I feel like the PR community on a soft scale, like I'm not talking about grand explanations of and grand, amplifications of the work that's being done, but is to remind the right communities that they have a vested interest in joining this narrative and to do so at the appropriate times. So I go to big box, they have a lot of restaurant supply places that are not normally inclined to donate, but I put my personal reputation on the line. And then I put our professional, what we have done so far, social media, whatnot, so that they can verify what I'm asking for. And then I always give them credit. So even if it's an entity that I don't necessarily agree with, I bring them into the conversation so that in the future, when a big box restaurant warehouse suddenly gets even one person who comes in and says, thank you for making that donation, it makes it easier for me to make the second ask and the third ask and the fourth ask, right? And so that's one of the things that I would say would be really helpful, because those are not in, at least not in my forte, I can appeal to the, maybe 15,000 people that follow us across our platforms, but we all know 15,000 people, it's a very small percentage of our listening population. So I would say that would be very helpful, is being able to understand the storylines and then galvanize support from the community, especially from people that you would not necessarily see as allies, and bring them along, I hope that helps.
Yeah. Sasha, I love how you put it, and I absolutely enjoyed listening to, the structured way in which you approach it. And then you gave an example of how you actually do it with Big Box, right? And that's really important, because when a PR story is picked, and I'm not a PR professional, I'm a marketing, business strategy, brand strategy professional, but I've worked with PR professionals, with Unilever debating Greenpeace and telling them that mercury was not, part of what they let out in the lake or the pond, and how they wanted to ensure that internal messaging never heard the Greenpeace message, and employees continued to be gung-ho about Unilever. So it's been used, it's as good as how it's used, right? And I completely agree with you when you say that there's a Jedi side to large corporations, and then there's a Darth Vader side to them, right? And which we highlight, which we pull at, is what they're going to express. So, and it's very similar with people too, right? If we keep labeling people and we say, oh, you're so naughty, oh, you're doing this wrong or whatever. We're actually teasing that out and having those people express themselves in that way, versus if we constantly remind them of their Jedi side, then we're teasing that side of them out. So that was brilliantly put, how you said, about parsing it. And in the PR story, while I'm not fully, well versed with the entirety of the program that you guys are leading, I'm just coming into it, and so forgive me if I just misspeak. What I see is that it's really important to look at the target audience who you're seeking to address. And anytime we put a word out, there are two types of people. One is people who will consume that message because they're already kind of like on our side, or it's easy for them to be on our side because they're the public at large. And the other is, the institutions. And institutions are made up of people as well. Now, but both of them, they consume the word that's put out in two different ways. The institution is going to process it and have official responses, which might turn into financial commitment, which might turn into walking away and, lambasting us on popular media and trying to put their PR machinery in Darth Vader gear versus in Jedi gear to help us. And the public at large, they respond in a more simplistic manner, in a more personally significant manner. So, and because they are more prone to being inspired by the case studies and by the stories of emancipation, et cetera, that we put out. So when I came into this, you were sharing earlier about how you helped and how it creates empathy and a bond, and that story just in itself is just so inspiring. But it might not be inspiring for an institution. It will be inspiring to the public at large. So when crafting a PR story, there are a couple of ways to do this. Is whenever a PR, and a press conference is a totally different thing, because that's an event, and managing that event needs multiple messaging, and you need to be really shrewd and careful and accurate in terms of who is it that you're talking to. And then you have to pick. You have to pick whether you're talking to the institution or whether you're talking to the public at large. But in general, when messages are put out, especially on social media, on YouTube or other, as part of your marketing talk or your roadmap, that's when tailoring that message and to say that, okay, now I'm going to talk to the public. So all the case studies, all the inspiring tidbits, the stories sort of like go out in that way, because then that the gravity is going to be with the public, the people. And when you're putting out something not against, but for an institution to hear, then to pull at the Jedi side, but it has to be, let me use an old colonial metaphor, carrot and stick, because you want to tease out the Jedi side from them, but you also want to hold them accountable for what they're not really doing, for what the systemic injustice that they might be pushing. You know what I'm saying? And to do that balance, it needs to be very sophisticatedly put out. And that has been done, and it can be done. And when we do it like that, then, we're actually inviting them to have a conversation with us at an equal table. Because if we go militant and we say, rah, 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 all that you do is wrong, then it's very easy for them to brand you as, oh, this movement is too emotional. And they attack the emotion and not the substance behind that emotion or the message. The message gets thrown out. Am I making sense at all?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that, so there's two philosophies that I've been holding on to. One is that people inherently want to do good and they want to feel good, especially during times like this. And this happens a lot with even people who are fundraising and fundraising in general, is that you are giving someone else the opportunity to be part of something good. And that is the message that needs to be inculcated into every single person's speech pattern. Often people for whom their love language is service have a very humble way, which I am absolutely of that mentality, of deflecting the good or the praise that comes with their actions. But instead, if they took that and they said, okay, this is a cloak I will wear, but you too can wear it. let me share that with you. That becomes another act of service. And we have to get into that mentality where we say what we are doing is allowing for people to participate. So that brings me to my second philosophy is I am a firm believer in the final yes after the final no. There is always a yes to be had. You just need to figure out how to get there. And you need to understand the nuances of conversation with that person to get there. So for instance, I am trying to get, I have a giant corporate like grocery store up the street from my house, Winco. And I recognize that one of the shelters that I'm supporting right now really likes a lot of variety, but it's well beyond my ability to be able to purchase this many different ingredients. So what I've been doing, Winco is an employee-owned cooperative. And so one of the challenges is that there isn't really one person in particular that I can speak to. It's a corporate entity that I have to petition and ask for donations and whatnot. But when I walk in there, and I've been walking in there literally every week, just saying, hey, let me talk to somebody, is I want employees within that organization to advocate for my ask before I ask their corporate board. So I go in and I say, I think it's amazing that this is an employee-owned cooperative. What do you guys do for charitable measures? And they'll usually say, oh, we donate all of our leftover stuff to this one food bank. And then I give them the understanding that, yes, you know, I actually work with a lot of different smaller shelters that are unable to get the support that they need from these food banks because there aren't enough volunteers going back and forth. Do you think that there's somebody that I can speak to that would be able to help us with a donation? And then I qualify it. I say, you know, it's just, I need to feed 50 people. If I could just get 2 slices of bread per person, I can make them this, right? So I tell them, oh, it's just 10 loaves. That's all I really need, right? 10 loaves is a drop in the bucket, especially when they just cost $2 a loaf. So it's a very small way, that's not something, it's a very easy way for someone to say yes to me, right? And then what I do is I talk to each, I started with a cashier or a stocker, and then I move on to like shift manager, to assistant manager, to manager, moving on to branch manager. And I give each one of them the opportunity to say yes. Now they all can't say yes, but eventually one person, I will get to that person for whom 10 loaves of bread is no big deal. And that conversation, when I make such a minimal ask, the response has always been and will always be, is that all you need? We can do more. Let us know what else we can do, because it's an easy way to increase their involvement and give them the same joy that a small business feels, because we are better connected with our community. So I would say that that final yes, you have to have the longevity of all these no's and recognize that even though it's a no, me saying, hi, Alyssa, you know, Joe asked me to speak to you. Thank you for taking the time for my call. Could you help me figure out how to do this? Is you bring people along so that they are invested in the outcome. Next time I go in, you know, every time I go in, somebody who I have already spoken to will be like, hey, did you get in touch with my manager? Did you get in touch with this person? Is there anybody else that I can help you with? Because they understand. So I would say that that is one of the ways that in larger corporations with several layers of bureaucracy, it's a little harder to get through, but those are some of the ways that you can inspire your community to appropriately help. Make a small ask. Give them a small taste of how wonderful compassion feels. Reward them with social media. Make sure that they hear that they are appreciated by the community that they have served. And then make a bigger ask and invite them to give you that bigger ask before you even have to ask for it. It sounds very, procedural in a system, especially when you're talking about food insecurity, that is so motivated by deep sensitivities and emotion. But that's what I meant by, if something is going to have longevity, it needs to have operational structure. There has to be and infrastructure even to an ask. Otherwise, you're going to have to reinvent how to make that first ask every single time. So I would say, I mean, you're absolutely on the money. There will be parts of every organization that you have to tease out, but there are one thing that we have in our favor, and any organization that is trying to affect good in this has in their favor, is that we have the ability to appeal to the humanity of someone and to their ego. It is an unfortunate statement to make, but so often I see ego as, say, the Darth Vader, and humanity as, say, the Jedi. And you need to be able to appeal to both without divesting them from each other in order to have, you know, the means justify the end, if that makes sense.
Oh, it totally makes sense. It's the whole human construct. And you know, you've given a stunning example of how you're leveraging it. And to systematize it in order to operationalize it is really important. And oftentimes talk tracks are developed for that very reason. So what would happen is we see this a lot in, let's say, the medical device industry, right? So a medical device rep is going to go in and he needs to talk to not just the microbiologist, you know, on the factory floor or the QA QC floor, but he might also need to go and talk to the buyer who will eventually make the decision, and the microbiologist or whoever else is the influencer. And they also then need to have a budget allocation, a strategic alignment with the C-suite, right? And the talk track for each of those levels in the organization are very different. Typically what we see is that the Jedi side keeps coming lower and lower and lower as you go higher and higher and higher, because there's more Darth Vader side, which sort of goes up. So you have to appeal more to the ego of, let's say, a CFO or a CXO, whoever might be, versus when you're just talking to the person on the factory floor or the shop floor, right? And the talk track needs to then be tailored. And there are specific ways in which you can train people to do that. And once you've sensitized them, given that training, the next time they're prepared that if I meet this person in an elevator, I have an elevator pitch, and this is what I, you know, bring out at that point in time. And next time when I go in for a formal appointment and there's a conversation, then you do a little bit of a homework and you try and figure out how to create that chemistry with the person in front of you, understanding where they're coming at, you know, from an institutional or organizational standpoint. What does their business card say, right? And then you appeal. I also love the fact that you use languages of love as a construct. It's beautiful, because then you're also trying to understand act of service. You know, how does that move the humanity within that person? And from an institutional standpoint, typically with large organizations, it's the gift that they can give, right? So the gift is their language of love, and they love to see credit, you know, be given, and that's the way they donate, that's the way they sponsor. And how do you get that sponsorship? Also, earlier in one of the things that you were mentioning, you mentioned, you know, going to Microsoft, going to other, when, you know, so when we look at big corporation, there are different types of them, and Unilever is or Procter & Gamble or Kraft Heinz is not exactly who you want to go, you know, to. Maybe you find a way to go to them, but then they'd want to then use their sponsorship of something like this and blow it up into their own positive PR, essentially to sort of put a coat on whatever else they might be doing, right? And so every gift that is accepted, every sponsorship that is accepted also comes with the opportunistic, you know, opportunity that the person who's a giver is going to use and leverage using their own PR mouthpieces. And I guess that, you know, as we systematize something, operationalize something, it just calls for a little bit of a caution as to who we rub shoulders with, the choice of organization. And there's plenty of money to be had from non-participants with the grocery manufacturers of America, right?
Absolutely. I think so I was lucky enough about a year ago to participate in a fellowship program that took people with grassroots ideas and gave them a parameter through which to try to understand how to grow those grassroots ideas. And one of the really important things is to always work within a system of equals. And so, for instance, when you're asking, say, an Intel employee to donate, you're still working within a system of equals, because you're asking an individual to donate and you're asking them to ask their corporation to match that donation. But eventually, say Intel becomes your sponsor, right? Say Intel says, okay, you know, I have 50,000 employees on this campus, and 10,000 of them keep, you know, giving to the Make-A-Wish Foundation. We should donate to the Make-A-Wish Foundation. The Make-A-Wish Foundation has players that are in equal status to that large corporate entity. So for instance, they may not just have Intel, but they would have like Banner Health. They would also have, you know, Microsoft. They would have Microchip. They would have these larger entities that equalize the circle as well. You're absolutely right. Vigilance is always needed. But one of the things to also keep in mind is that you always keep the playing field very equal. Otherwise, you'll very quickly lose control of the vision and the mission of what you're actually trying to do. It can easily, for instance, if I directly went to, you know, Kraft Foods that has so many resources across the world and said, can you give me $3.5 million and I will continue this project for the next 5 years? And they said, okay, but you can only use Kraft projects or Kraft brands. Then it becomes a question of what is more important to the organization. Is it the messaging, or is it the end result that people may be fed? And then it becomes a negotiation, especially at levels where there are unequal players, where you have to ask yourself whether or not this unequal player is a means to the ends, and if that is worth it. So I would say in a scenario like that, if we got an opportunity from someplace like, say, you know, Kraft saying, I will donate 50 million pounds of beef if you would do that, right? I would then go to a place like Impossible Foods or Beyond Meat and say, this is what your competitor is willing to do. What can you do? Do you not want your message to go out in front of them? So what you do is you appeal to people who have larger means than you do, and then change the dynamic of ego, right? You tweak that dynamic of ego. It's not, at that level, it's no longer just about the humanity. It is about utilizing, I think it's about utilizing and appealing to the different levels of ego that may be at play to create a system of humanity, or systemic humanity, if that makes sense. So for them, it's no longer about, okay, well, I could spend, you know, the same $3.5 million on an ad campaign, or $10 million on an ad campaign, or something to that effect. Or what I could do is give the $10 million to this organization and then watch us end up on local news and the national news for the next how much ever. And as you go up in an organization, you know, what somebody on the floor of an organization, a worker on the floor, I am appealing to them because I'm appealing to them in the same space. I am their audience, right? The person who's purchasing their food or purchasing their service or whatnot. But as you go up, say the CFO, he has two audiences, or she has two audiences. She's appealing to both the public. She's also appealing to her shareholders. And what is challenging with that is you have to then recognize that the shareholders are also the public. So how do you reach that message? How do you get that message to the people who want to hear it? So, you know, does it, would somebody want to say, okay, I'm going to invest in this ad campaign that somebody may mute when they're on TV, you know, or they're going to run off to the bathroom or make a sandwich or what have you while it's going on? And it'll still reach a lot of people, but you have no idea what the actual social commitments are of the people who are watching. Or as a shareholder, would I much rather prefer an organization saying, I am going to donate all of this food. That's exactly what Impossible Foods is doing right now. They're donating to non-vegan chefs and asking non-vegan chefs with very high profiles to be able to make food in conjunction with like the World, you know, the World Health Foundation, or, you know, the, what is it that, Jose Andres is doing right now. I can't remember, but I think it's WFC. They're essentially saying, here, use our product and flood the media with it, right? That is not just Impossible Foods saying, I want to do well. There is a part of that, but it's also, I want to do better than what Beyond Meat is doing. I want to do better than what, McDonald's is doing. What has Burger King done for you lately? So those are, it is exhausting. It is exhausting for people who are attached to the everyday service of what they do to have to think along those lines, because that's the exact opposite of what motivates us. I mean, a lot of people, Sailesh knows this, Jackie knows this, but I have run 24 Carats for 12 years. We've been, we incorporated 13 years ago, and I have never once taken an income, ever. In the beginning, it was because we couldn't. We were a small business, we had no money. But then when I realized that my husband, he finally graduated and got a job, and that we could live within those means, that we didn't need a lot, and that for 5 years, if I didn't need to take an income, maybe I don't need to for 6, maybe I don't need to for 7, and so on and so forth. And then the idea was, what can I do with that income instead? I can pay my employees more. I can purchase more from local farms. I can give my team paid sick leave. I can do these. I can utilize that sacrifice, if you will, and amplify it for the greater good, right? That's what we're looking to do here. So when you take people like myself who are so used to saying, I don't need any remuneration, I don't need credit. We still don't have a logo for 24 Carats 12 years later. We have no logo. And somehow we have survived. I have no idea how. What is it that makes them tick? It's the appreciation and the connection with their community that makes them feel like their life is worth value. I feel more valuable, and I feel like I have been able to justify my existence if I am able to do for others. So you take somebody like that and you suddenly say, well, you will only get to this threshold if you keep that attitude. But in order to play with all of these larger thresholds, in order to be able to, expand this vision and this view and this feeling for more people, you're going to have to learn to interact on a level of corporate conversation that you're uncomfortable with. And so I feel like for any organization, you're absolutely correct in saying you have to teach that level of, you have to teach that language. You have to teach people how to make that elevator pitch. If I can, I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I had before this fellowship, it's called Leading for Change. So before Leading for Change, I was invited as one of the only vegan chefs to a boot camp with an organization called the James Beard Foundation. And the James Beard Foundation is kind of like, they used to be a very hoity-toity food award, scenario. And they have since adopted what they call impact programs. So galvanizing social impact. And that was one of the organizations, or one of the reasons that I had gotten involved and that I had even gotten invited. So the final day, it was a 2-day boot camp where it was just like all day and all night. The final day, our last act was to pretend to do an elevator pitch, to practice an elevator pitch for our senator. And my elevator pitch was about the SNAP program, funding the SNAP program and keeping regulations on it for Kirsten Sinema. I finished that program in early, I don't know, I would say July, I guess, was the James Beard Foundation. And then in September, I joined Leading for Change. The first day I walked in, sat down, I'm doing, it's an 8 hours per day kind of program. And in the last 2.5 hours, Senator Sinema was one of our speakers. And she walked in, and I was given the SNAP program to give her an elevator pitch in front of everybody. So you have no idea when those opportunities will actually come. And it's almost impossible. I mean, I like almost passed out. I was like, what is happening in the world? But that's exactly what happened. So I think you're absolutely right, Nivi. Like you have to teach your organization to evangelize your message by making it part of everything they do. I will never go to a public place. I will never go to an organization's event or whatnot without mentioning the people that I'm working for and working towards helping. Because you don't know who's going to say yes. You know, you don't know who has the keys to the purse, right? So I completely agree with you. I completely agree with you.
Right. You know, I want to share a personal story around this. So, Sasha, I completely get, you know, the discomfort that you just articulated so well. You're so eloquent. That is just amazing, because you're able to make the rest of us who are listening in and you know, watching you share this, visualize what you might be going through, you know, given what you've created, which is astounding. And then when you're put in a situation where you have to operate outside of the value system and the integrity and the authenticity with which you run your work, but enter into a system and appeal to their generosity, if they have any, that those systems that work on a totally different level, right? And in a very different value system. So I was kind of like raised professionally in the value system that makes you so uncomfortable. And then I had to jettison myself out of it when it started hurting me so bad that it started to make me uncomfortable, and I started speculating, am I even in the right value system? Right? And I then, in the last 3 years of having gone plant-based, I haven't been plant-based for so long, so I'm a complete newbie to this, you know, movement, and I'm learning so much. I'm like a sponge right now. I'm a toddler. And I keep kind of like looking back and looking at the tribe that I didn't entirely leave, because, you know, what you've seen once, you can never unsee it. They'll always be a part of me. I have my friends, you know, my husband, who's part of that tribe still, and there's a leg of mine which is still in the corporate world, and then another leg of it which is outside of it. But by virtue of that, I feel I'm this hybrid, if you like, you know, who is now sort of looking and trying to live a value system which isn't as driven by in the realm of ego, and is more driven by the realm of self, where the currency is not necessarily your business card and the money and the pay stub that you earn, but something completely different and entirely different, right? And that bipolarity or that duality is, I guess we all struggle with at some level. And my life right now is, and my work and my profession is a living embodiment of that duality, because I'm still part here and part here. The personal story I want to share was, I still, you know, end up doing a lot of brand consulting for biotech companies and, you know, life sciences companies. They have nothing to do with veganism, nothing to do with plant-based. Although I'm trying to turn the mothership of my work around to wanting to do and, you know, be selective about the clients I work with. Now, what I've started to do is embedding and implanting seeds of my newfound value system back in the boardroom whenever I go in. So when I'm having conversation with these people, mostly it's a testosterone filled environment. It's very male dominated, you know, with all due respect to all the males on this conversation. But I just feel that when a lot of that, plus the ego, plus the normalized violent system that we all, you know, see in the corporation, when you see it in the boardroom, that energy, that hostile energy is so palpable. And you can see that, you know, the VP of marketing is like up against the VP of finance, and there's something at play, and it's so palpable. And you walk in, it's a predictable choreography at this point, you know, for me, and you go and you make a presentation, you talk to them about things. And then I found a way during breaks to start talking about ahimsa, and to start talking about food, and to start talking about whole foods, plant-based, start talking about climate change, and to do a dance where I go thus far but no further until I see some reciprocation. And the reciprocation often is either positive or sometimes defensiveness, or what is this woman talking about? You know, it's like, cool, maybe we'll get back to business once the break is done, but while she's munching on her vegan sandwich, she wants to talk about this la la land she lives in, right? And then what I've witnessed, what I've had happen is out of that in-group context, once the meeting is done, I'll receive a sneaky little message from the very same person who might have been the most vocal about making fun of the vegan movement or whatever, saying, hey, you know what? I was talking to my wife about this, and I watched Game Changers, and I watched Forks Over Knives, and I watched Cowspiracy. I would, if you have 5 minutes, then we can talk about it. And sure enough, those 5 minutes become 50 minutes. And then they become what I call closet vegans. And these closet vegans are people who will never tell their boss or the people they lead in their teams that they're vegan for fear of, ridicule, such is the situation in the corporate world. But when they go back home, their wife is making Impossible Burger, or their wife is looking up, whatever the next Forks Over Knives meal planner or something like that. So that is the sort of one-on-one sort of a thing that seems to be happening until, here's another example, until you get to the MD, and I have some, friends who are like MD here and somebody there or whatever. And then they start saying, hey, during coronavirus times, we don't want people to become unhealthy. And we want, could you just come in addition to making this whole brand thing that you do for us, could you just come in and talk to us about nutrition? Or could you just come in and talk to us about, veganism? And that's what's starting to happen now, where I'm doing these little Zoom conversations, talking to entire leadership teams and, in different parts of the world, who are now becoming open to it. And then what happens is a WhatsApp kickstart will result from it, or a, Facebook community, but they still don't want to come out in the open. So they want to keep it WhatsApp. They want to keep it on a closed loop group, but they all want to experiment with it, but they don't want to come out yet, which is why I call them closet vegans, right? So when we're talking to people in this alleviation of world hunger, and I want to put these two stories in context, these people have budget strings. They're sitting on budget within their organization, no matter what kind of an organization they lead. But if they're closet vegans, you can still appeal to to the humanity of them. And people live in that duality. Those people who are closet vegans, they're living a dual life, right? We can call it hypocritical or whatever, but it's what they feel is right for them at this point in time in terms of their personal brand and their professional brand, and how it might impact their career. If their boss comes to know that they're not going to go to the steakhouse because there's steak because they've turned closet vegan, it might be a career limiting move for a lot of these people, right? And these are real circumstances people have to deal with because they have to put food on the table for their kids too, right? So it's a really interesting thing. And for the world hunger movement, like how do we alleviate it? Then the messaging that all of us on the Jedi side, where we're not afraid to wear the V badge on our sleeves and talk about it openly, what we then need to be aware of is these little movements that are happening. So there are people who are non-vegans in totality. They're living that value system. They're living that belief system. Then there are closet vegans. Then there are vegans of convenience. And then there are vegans on steroids, like the climate healers and all of you guys who want to join a base camp and want to commit their days and nights to really, really create that enrollment. And when you actually create that segmentation, you can do targeting and you can do positioning. You can come up with operationalizing those talk tracks. And once those talk tracks are embedded, then you start seeing conversion ratios. And what you want to see happen, if I can sort of visualize this like a pyramid, is that a base is non-vegans, then there are closet vegans, then there are vegans of convenience, then there are open vegans, but not on steroids yet, and then there are steroidal vegans who are going to make Vegan World 2026 manifested into a reality by 2026, right? So what we're looking at is conversions and the stories that will trigger that conversion, and how each of us bring our own unique skill set and comfort zone within which we can operate to trigger that conversion and create that momentum so that, Sailesh's social contagion mathematical model can become a reality, and recidivism, the R0 ratio, can be brought down. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I just need to interject real briefly here. Love this conversation. Hate to derail it even in the slightest. And but I don't think it's necessarily being derailed very much. We're now 10 minutes into the 2-hour time block of the Divine Feminine, which happens every Friday from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. Pacific time, led by my queen Melissa, my sister Jackie, from whom I was separated at birth, and my sister Myra. And so happy to turn it over to the three of you. Just wanted to apologize to James and to Jubilee, who had their hands up for about a half an hour. And anyway, hopefully we'll get them in. But at this point, I want to welcome everyone who's joining us. Charles from Switzerland, Lauren from...
I just have to say, Nivi, that was beautiful. Thank you so much. It was great. Perfect.
Yay.
Thank you, Charles. And thank you, Nivi. Oh my goodness. And thank you, Sailesh, for inviting Nivi. Thank you. Everyone, please stick around. We're about to kick off what for us is really the most delicious part of the block party, which is the Divine Feminine. We will be back on the topic of food healers throughout the day, and then dedicated from 7 to 9 p.m. Pacific time this evening. So we have 4 hours of food healers every block party. With that, I'm going to mute myself and turn it over to Melissa, Jackie, and Myra. And thank you all so much. And please take it away. Welcome. I'm going to stop recording and start a new recording. We are live streaming on Twitch as well. So doing the recording transition now.